were at 9% in July, and we won the election in December. So polls are a snapshot. It's not an election now. We need to make sure that when there is an election, the public see a credible and viable alternative to Labour, and that will be my party.
And that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Financial Times. Their headline, Zelensky will not recognise talks with Moscow that exclude Ukraine. Or when we come back, do stay with us.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Welcome back. You are watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages of the newspapers as they arrive. But first, our top stories. The Prime Minister has told European leaders meeting in Paris he's prepared to commit British troops to Ukraine to help protect a possible peace deal. But he's called on the US to provide a backstop. A plane has crash-landed in Toronto in Canada, flipping upside down on the tarmac, leaving 15 people injured and 2 critical. The Vatican has said Pope Francis will stay in hospital as long as it takes with a respiratory infection, presenting a complex clinical picture. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. And it's time to see now what's making the headlines with a columnist and broadcaster, Steve Richards, and the former Conservative Special Advisor, Salma Shah. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. We're starting with The Guardian, which says Keir Starmer has urged Donald Trump to provide a US backstop to a European peacekeeping force in Ukraine to deter Russia from attacking the country again. There's a similar headline in The Times. Ukraine needs US safety pledges, the Prime Minister will tell Donald Trump. The Telegraph reports that Germany has rejected Sir Keir's call for Europe to step up and deploy troops to Ukraine as part of any peace deal. The Financial Times reports on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's insistence that he will not recognise any discussions with Russia that don't directly include his government. The Metro calls Britain's role in the Paris talks the Storm offensive. Meanwhile, The Eye says the government may have to cut spending in other areas if it increases its military involvement in Ukraine. And the Mail has a story on politics at home, with the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, calling for Britain to get off our knees and start fighting for Western values. The Express reports that 3 in 4 pensioners are living in cold homes after the government cut winter fuel payments. And in The Star, the headline, The Age of the Sausage, after a study finds that Gen Z are ditching vegan diets and eating more meat. Yet another scientific study. Well, we're joined tonight by Steve Richards and Salma Shah to take us through the papers, starting with the Metro and their headline, The Storm Offensive, that their appraisal of Sir Keir Starmer following the talks in Paris, the emergency talks called by President Macron. Steve, what was Sir Keir's role? Is he the leading...
the Storm Offensive?
Yes, is he the leading
So even actually
party?
before the meeting, in Paris, he had written a piece where he had suggested that British troops could be part of a peacekeeping force, and the US administration responded positively to that. But there are so many moving parts to this saga tonight. Actually, the front pages are a good guide to a lot of the moving parts, that that proposition in itself raises 1,000 different questions, to the point where I think it's quite risky of him. Always a British Prime Minister is under pressure to be Churchillian in these situations. Show you're leading from the front. And so they often do and fall into traps. So what will the peace be that the peacekeeping force is meant to impose or make sure it remains in place? What role will the peacekeeping force take? And so on. And we can already see, I think we're coming to it, the reaction of some of the other leaders to it was negative. We're going to come to that in a moment. And I think it is, I mean, some people have praised him for taking this initiative and showing that Europe has a voice and with ideas. But everything is so imprecise at the moment. You know, America and Russia are meeting tomorrow, but to what end? When will Ukraine respond to that? And so on. That this is a kind of leap beyond all of that. And it raises many, many complex questions which neither Keir Starmer nor anyone else can answer at the moment.
But can Sir Keir Starmer take the credit for being the lead in terms of standing up for Ukraine?
Well, it's interesting because I think Britain has been one of the more vocal countries in Europe, particularly about Ukraine and the support that's being offered to Ukraine. And so there's a consistency there, I think, at least as far as military advice is going to the Prime Minister, despite the fact the Prime Minister has changed. I think what's interesting about this is that it's an incredibly risky move to put yourself above your head above the parapet to say, I'm going to go to the US and I'm going to be the person that leads the Storm offensive, as the Metro has described it, to say that we recognise that we have to step up. here's me pledging 5,000 troops for a potential peacekeeping force. We need you, the US, to do exactly the same. You know, the president is not known as somebody who takes well to these kinds of negotiations or being put in some kind of corner. So I'm hoping there has, as you say, Steve, been some kind of back-channeling, as you would call it in diplomatic terms, to say that this would be a welcome move by the British Prime Minister.
But we know that President Trump has said quite categorically that he doesn't want American boots on the ground.
And this is one of the risks. So the backstop proposition, that there must be US backstop, a word that haunts British politics. It was the customs union backstop in Brexit that drove the Brexiteers crazy. That emerged sort of after he had originally said Britain might commit to a peacekeeping force, because clearly, and it's obvious, that the peace can only be viable with American backing too. But as you say, Trump has been absolutely clear that he doesn't envisage a role for the US once the peace deal has been done. So, I mean, Starmer's visit next week to America is going to be compelling viewing. The joint press conference afterwards, drop everything for it, because it will be fascinating. Now, there's a lot of briefings in Britain that Britain can be the bridgehead between Europe and the United States. Well, I wonder. Tony Blair used to say that, but Britain was then in the European Union. It's now outside it. And he couldn't be the bridgehead over Iraq because Germany and France were against then. So let's see how this develops. But you can already hear the qualifications to the proposition that Britain might send in troops. And that's one of them. Will America commit too?
And also there are already divisions between the European leaders. Olaf Scholz saying that he was even irritated by the prospect of a European army serving a peacekeeping mission in Ukraine, that, you know, it really was inappropriate to even raise this at this time.
And so the Daily Telegraph has this story, and I think, as Steve rightly said, each of the front pages tomorrow tells its own unique angle on this very big intervention that Keir Starmer has made. And as you point out, Scholz left the leaders' meeting in Paris today, the EU's leaders' meeting, and seemed quite annoyed at the fact that this spectre had been raised. Now, let's point out again here that Germany will have its own unique history around its military and what it wants to use its military for. It will have lots of emotional attachment to that, and certainly its own relationship with Ukraine and Russia, because of its energy supply, puts it in a different and difficult position in terms of the rest of Europe. So you will have, even within the EU member states, a lot of discussion where the Commission at some point, or the leading lights of the EU members, will have to come to some kind of conclusion. But Scholz has come out very purposefully with some very strong language, and he also is, you know, in a politically difficult situation with elections on the horizon, with the AfD, a far-right German party, breathing down his neck. So, interestingly, for all the member states, they are going to have two things that they're going to have to consider, one which we'll discuss later, which is what is the financial implication for all these countries and what is the political implication for all these countries in their domestic settings. And this Telegraph front page, I think, really sums that up very well with Scholz's comments.
Yeah, well, we know that Germany, Poland and Spain all signalled reluctance to deploy troops. Only Britain, France and Sweden spoke out in favour.
And also at the moment, it's all so vague. As I've already pointed to one imprecision. We don't know what peace means yet. No one does. But also it raises sort of questions about, well, what does that mean if Russia does say break this deal, if there is a deal, and what form that deal takes? Does that mean British troops basically at war with Russia? This is where it all starts to remind me, not of the 1930s, but the build-up to the First World War, where there were all these moving parts. You had to know what was going on in Russia, Austro-Hungary Empire, Germany, Britain, and when it all came together, there was a sort of unintended conflagration. I'm not saying it's going to happen this time, but you can see the dangers of all these moving parts and different calculations being made over very imprecise propositions at the moment.
But, I mean, it's clear Starmer has said that he's willing to put British troops in harm's way.
Well, in effect, that might be what he's saying, but that's not necessarily what he's saying, because what he is saying is he wants the peace to be lasting, and Britain will help facilitate a lasting peace. But you rightly say, what happens if the peace does not last?
There will be those.
Does that mean does that trigger a European war?
Yes,
in effect?
but there will be those that then would say that we should then allow Ukraine to join NATO, which of course would be a complete anathema to Russia. And then, do you even get particularly far in negotiations? And so there are going to be all these questions. You're right, it's going to be incredibly complicated. But the principle at stake here is if you have a hostile state actor in the way, or a hostile aggressor in the way that Russia has been in Ukraine, what do you do to protect Ukraine against further forays into its territories? Because this is not, that's what Salma is saying, this is not going to be the end if we just say, here's a settlement and Russia can take this portion of Ukraine as it currently stands.
Yeah, because the aggressor will have been seen to
have prevailed.
Well, hold on. He wanted to take over the whole of Ukraine and thought it could be done quite quickly. That is not going to be the outcome of this negotiation. We'll have to wait and see what is the outcome. But I think it will be quite hard for him to present it. Clearly he will, as a triumph. Because
but if he gains territory, he clearly will present it as a triumph.
Clearly, the deal will be he gains some territory. But the original aim was to take over Ukraine. He's not going to get that.
But I think that why don't we move on to the Financial Times? Because here's the point, right? Zelensky is saying that he will not recognise any talks that do not feature Ukraine, as he rightly should. And so we have, alongside this Paris summit that has just ended, and Starmer going to the US at some point next week, we have, at the moment, in Saudi Arabia, meetings of foreign ministers. So Sergei Lavrov is going to be there of Russia. You've got Marco Rubio, who's going to be representing the White House. And this is not supposed to be about this dialogue with Russia to try and end the war. But it's impossible to say that these things won't be discussed at some point in the margins. And it does feel like there is going to be some kind of settlement without the voice of Ukraine at the table. So I do understand, even though, it's not my team, the Labour Party is not my team, I do understand why there's this push and why Starmer's made this massive risky intervention. Because it is about trying to leverage and help support Ukraine's position.
But what the Americans are saying is perhaps not at this stage. This is a stage of the negotiations, and they've been speaking to Ukraine the entire time, and there will be points where they are brought in.
So I think this bit of it is a sort of red herring, and the British government saying Ukraine must be involved is a sort of clever thing because it looks as if they're being tough, but they're actually stating something that will happen. You can't get a deal where one of the parties to the deal isn't involved in the negotiation. What they're doing, and you can say rightly or wrongly, is sketching out where Russia stands at the moment. Of course, Ukraine will be brought in. Doesn't mean they'll like the deal. We'll have to wait and see. This is one of the other questions. What do European leaders do if Ukraine rejects the deal that Trump says is a good deal? Trump will clearly then back out. What does Britain, France, Germany and others do then? So, I mean, there are so many unanswered questions.
There's a real difficulty to this dynamic, and here's the difficulty, is that the whole of Western Europe was totally surprised at the Munich Security Conference when White House officials or, secretaries of state came over and basically said, Trump's having this 90-minute call with Putin, which is unheard of.
They shouldn't have been surprised. He's been saying it for years.
Right.
He said he could do a deal before he got into the White House.
But nonetheless, yes, you're right. Perhaps they shouldn't be surprised, and perhaps they should have been on high alert for this kind of thing to happen. But it's broken a trust, I think, in this scenario, and people are going to be more cautious. So you can understand Zelensky's sort of anxiety and frustration at not being present and being done to rather than being part of this discussion. Because what happens at any of these points is that the way that this negotiation is going to be framed is going to be critical at each step of this negotiation.
Completely agree.
And the direction and the trajectory of those discussions will change as each of these steps goes. So if I was in that position, I would be very worried about who was taking the lead and speaking on my behalf, because the Kremlin is there in and of itself as an entity. And so, therefore, even if it's just a semblance of kind of a charade, if you want, there has to be some presence on the Ukrainian side.
I don't think it will be a semblance. You cannot have a negotiation
Steve,
without the other party.
We could clearly go on for hours, because every day brings a new revelation. As you say, the talks in Saudi Arabia are due to start tomorrow, but we'll come back. We'll come back to this. We're going to take a break for the minute. Steve and Salma, thank you very much. Now, would more investment from the private sector help the NHS? We'll discuss that next. Do stay with us.
We're going to do this 100 times every day for the next 3 months.
Why have we agreed to this?
Raises many questions about many things.
Actually seeing people impacted, she was so upset.
It was powerful. They kind of couldn't believe they were being berated here.
Very much on my terms, I think was the subtext. News happens fast around Donald Trump.
It was a kind of wow moment.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, doesn't it?
It's Trump world, and we just live in it.
So, where next?
Follow Trump 100 wherever you get your podcasts.
Prime Minister Modi is the most popular politician in the country. He is expected to win his third term in these elections.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party, a promise fulfilled. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
He paid over 50,000 to traffickers to get him to America. Instead, he was kidnapped, tied up, and threatened by smugglers. A commando from the state force walks me through to a Mai Tai village on the front line.
Firing the civilian and they're burning our house.
We cross to the opposite side, held by the Guppies.
When they fire, we have to retaliate.
Sky News get the full story first. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration.
The enthusiasm is palpable. The young desire change.
These elections are a pivotal moment for the country's economic and political history. The concern here is that the public healthcare system is inadequate.
In a prayer, she's asking God to help understand what happened. I cannot carry on. God, help me. He says his world has crashed. Like him, there are scores of families searching for their loved ones.
Too often have families endured such tragedies for the negligence not only by the administration, but also by spiritual people in this country. Free wherever you get your news. Even though it has few seats in Parliament, Kashmir is symbolic and very significant. It's often been called a nuclear flashpoint.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away? Sky News, the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Steve Richards and Salma Shah. Let's take a look at the inside the Metro and this story regarding Wes Streeting. Private finance could be the tonic to fix the NHS. This comes off the back of some good news for Wes Streeting. They've met one of their key election promises to deliver an extra 2 million NHS appointments in England, but now suggesting that the private sector could be the key for restoring the NHS to full health.
Well, he didn't quite say that. It's very interesting because it's Wes Streeting who's seen as pro-private sector in the sort of, again, vague terms we use. He repeated what has been common for years, that they will use the private sector to meet the capacity demand. But then he was asked about private finance initiatives, which New Labour used in their first term or so, after 97. And he said, quotes, PFI deals lumbered the NHS with an enormous cost that it continues to bear. So we need to be very cautious about it. So actually, that element of his interview this morning, it was absolutely nothing new in it at all.
OK. The actual quote was, we're definitely committed to using the independent sector's spare capacity to bring down NHS waiting lists.
This is what they've been saying for a long time. And this, so far, is the only absolutely clear use they're making of the private sector, you know, in terms of reform, that other ubiquitous word in British politics. So we'll have to see. I mean, he doesn't rule out private finance initiatives as a way of getting money in, but he acknowledges that there are expensive consequences, and there are.
Salma? Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, you know, you are talking about the chief of NHS England, Amanda Pritchard, also talking about it, about how ministers need to think more radically, because let's not forget, the NHS is supposed to be independently run by, well, at least in England, by NHS England. So after ministers have set policy, in fact, the running of hospitals and things like that actually goes downstream to other people. So actually, Wes Streeting would have little power after policy is set, and it really does become about delivery. And I think it's important always to have that distinction, because people always think that ministers are responsible, but actually after they're setting the policy, they're not the people who are going into hospital wards to check that things are running well.
Until they become responsible when things go wrong.
Exactly.
Then they have to become responsible.
The buck stops there. Let's take a look at the Telegraph. And this story I definitely know a lot about. Gen Z and millennials are the least likely to rely on the sniff test and instead throw food away before it's out of date.
I really, just the other day, was relying on the sniff test when I was cooking, and there was the chilli that looked a little bit past its best, and my husband and I was just at the counter going, yeah, it'll be fine, chop it up and throw it in there. And, you know, we don't have Gen Z children, but I can just imagine my siblings are not... My younger siblings...
Gen Z's in my household. They call me the dustbin because I eat anything. I just smell it, looks fine, eat it.
But at the same time, Gen Z are very worried about sustainability. Gen Z are very worried about climate. And so that is part and parcel of being able to understand how you cook more sustainably, how you use things, how you look at whether you can get away with it. You know, rotten bananas, brown bananas, best banana bread you'll ever make.
I always check that sell-by date and can't bear going beyond it.
Really?
So I'm at one with the Gen Z
You're
generation.
a Gen Z at heart.
Very surprising, Steve.
Smell it, look at it, taste it. If it's fine, eat it.
You're not like Theresa May, scraping the mould off.
Certainly not. Certainly
Don't go that far.
I'm with the Gen Z
Thank you
crowd.
very much. We're going to take a look at the weather now. See you back in the 11. Well, it'll stay mostly cold tomorrow before turning milder on Wednesday. Expect a chilly start with a frost in parts of the south and east. Most places will be dry, but there'll be some patchy rain in the north and around the western Irish Sea. Northern parts can expect some snow and possibly freezing rain too, mainly on the hills.